Shannon Bream is up next with a fantastic show as always. Miss Shannon.
Listen, Laura, the people who made that thing, the animatronic thing, they might be on the naughty list this year.
Oh, good.
They need some work on that thing. I mean, I'm with you on that.
Great idea.
Laura,
Horrible.
great show, including that.
Thanks.
Here's what's coming up on our show tonight.
Tax reform by Christmas.
Yeas are 227 and the nays are 203. The conference report is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Roars from Republicans drowning out protesters as an historic and controversial tax overhaul gets closer to the president's desk.
This is their money after all.
Fox's Chad Pergram is following the latest on Capitol Hill. We'll also get expert analysis from Chris Steyerwalt on what tax reform means for the Trump agenda and the country. The FBI's number 2 gets a closed-door grilling on Capitol Hill. Ed Henry investigates what happened today with Andrew McCabe as GOP criticism of him mounts. And a stern warning to the world before the United Nations weighs in on the Trump administration's Jerusalem moves.
It won't be forgotten.
Former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, is here to preview Thursday's showdown at the UN.
Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. New tonight on tax reform, the United States Senate is moments away from a vote that many, even in President Trump's own party, often doubted would happen by Christmas. Yet here we are in the final moments of a debate on tax reform, a bill the Democrats claim would punish the middle class at the expense of the rich. Republicans say it will cut taxes for the vast majority of Americans and ignite the U.S. economy. The House will have to re-vote on the plan once the Senate's done because of a bureaucratic snafu. Democrats and some of the media claim that was due to the Republicans' insistence on a speedy vote. Nonsense, says Senator John Kennedy, a Republican from Louisiana.
Somebody screwed up. A member of the staff's screwed up. It's not the end of Western civilization. We have the votes. We'll have the votes tomorrow. If necessary, we'll have the votes the day after that.
All right, let's bring in Fox News senior producer Chad Pergram over on Capitol Hill. He's working around the clock on this thing, and it continues tonight. Chad, what is the latest? When will we get to this Senate vote?
Well, we're going to be here a little later than we thought. We were thinking that they were going to start this vote series just about right now as you went on the air, starting the final tax vote about 11:30. I've just been told before we came on the air that we're going to have some more speakers on the Senate floor. It is the Senate, so they like to talk. That vote series won't start till 11:45. The first vote is procedural. This deals with those things that don't fit into this special budget reconciliation process. And what they will do is they will get to the actual tax vote probably around 12:15, with the result around 12:30, 12:45, and then we'll have a press conference. Then they have to knock this back to the House of Representatives, and that's where they just will approve what the Senate has done. The problem here, Shannon, is that the House passed a bill this afternoon. They have these special budget rules in the Senate so they can use this special process to get around filibusters. They had to toss those things out to comply with those rules, and so therefore the bill changed. So the bill will change tonight in the Senate, and the House and Senate will not be in alignment. So the Senate will pass a different bill, and they'll move it back to the House. The House will then take the Senate's bill, then they'll be synced up, and then they can send it to the president's desk.
Okay, I have been watching your sometimes very technical emails, keeping us up to date on this today. And as you note, there are changes now in this version that will go back to the House for a vote. There are some conservatives over there, the Freedom Caucus and others, who are concerned about some change that may happen in the Senate. Will that cost enough votes on the House side to put this thing in jeopardy at all, or do you think it's a done deal?
They don't think so. I mean, I asked Vice President Pence earlier tonight when he walked through the Capitol if he thought that was going to be a problem. He said, "Oh, no, we're in good shape." That was the quote. They got actually, one more vote for the bill in the House of Representatives today than they did when they moved the initial version through earlier in November. Tom McClintock, a Republican from Northern California, pretty conservative, he was a no earlier. He voted yes today. And again, you had the standard suspects who voted no. Those from New Jersey, New York, the high tax states, moderates, people from California like Darrell Issa, Dana Rohrabacher. Those members of Congress were no's. They think they're going to be fine. But then, Shannon, the trick is keeping the government open by the end of the week, and they're running out of racetrack very quickly.
Yes, and we're going to talk with you about that a little bit later in this hour as we get closer to this vote. So stick around on Capitol Hill, Chad, hardest working man on the Hill. We'll be back to you shortly. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you.
All right, U.S. Capitol Police say they've arrested dozens of unlawfully protesting the GOP tax plan, including 18 more today. More than 200 activists have been arrested over the past few weeks. Protesters led by a coalition of liberal groups, which include the Women's March and the Center for Public Democracy, say they do anticipate more arrests and they are happy to spend time behind bars. Well, voices from the left, right, and center weighing in on just how much the middle class could benefit from the GOP's tax overhaul. The left-leaning Tax Policy Center actually concedes 80% of Americans will get a tax cut. Capitol Hill's Joint Committee on Taxation Analysis finds those in the middle class will get a quarter of the tax cuts. And the right-leaning Tax Foundation says it will add jobs and boost the GDP. So once it is passed, will it finally help boost President Trump's poll numbers? Fox News politics editor Chris Stirewalt joins us to break it down. Good to see you tonight.
And you know it's got to be serious because Pergram's got the three-piece suit on.
He's ready.
That's how you know.
Listen,
that's
the man,
serious business.
Nothing gets by him on the Hill. He's buttoned up and he's ready to go. He's staying for the long haul, so we'll go back to him.
He's the man.
He is. And now you're the man here for our analysis.
Okay.
So let's break this down. All right, the Tax Policy Center, which tends to lean to the left, they're not big fans of most of what the GOP does. Though, as we mentioned, they say 80% of Americans will get a cut. They say 15% will see no change at all. The average cut will be $1,600. And they say, this is them, they say the share of federal taxes paid by the wealthy will actually go up.
So what will happen is that the simply wealthy, their share will go up, and part of it is this business about state, local income taxes, people who are in high tax states, people who are da-da-da. So here we're talking about just regular rich people, the 250,000 and up club. These folks, they're going to pay some more. But the insanely rich, the crazy rich, the lighting their cigars with $100 bills on private jets rich, they are going to get bigly breaks. They are going to get nice, all sorts of good stuff. Because remember, the whole purpose of this bill, there's a lot in there for middle class people, and as the statistics point out, there will be tax cuts. 80% of people are going to experience a tax cut. But the whole point of this bill is to dump a bunch of liquidity into the top in the hopes that that trickles down into the rest of the economy, and that the very wealthy and that corporations take the money that they're getting back and that they're going to invest it, and that that's going to create jobs and growth. That's what they're banking on. That's what the Republicans have all their chips on.
Okay, so despite those things that are good things, allegedly, in the analysis of this bill coming from this left-leaning group, it continues to poll, and we've talked about this many times, where the American people don't love it. They're afraid of it. They think it's actually going to make their tax bill worse. So somewhere here, the Democrats, as they often do, have done really well with messaging. Here's what one of the top House Democrats, Steny Hoyer, said tonight on Special Report.
The main issue is this is a bad bill. It's a bad bill for our country. It's going to create great debt. And it's perverse in the sense that it gives some 83% of the tax cuts to the wealthiest in America.
Okay, so can all of those numbers that we've talked about also, jibe with what we're hearing from Congressman Hoyer? You
know, the line, lies, damn lies, and statisticians. Yes, you can pull, this blanket will pull in enough different directions that you can have it be whatever you want it to be. In part, that's a function of the fact that this is a jury-built, this is a jury-rigged contraption. In order to get around the Byrd rule and reconciliation and all of the jibber-jabber that Chad has to keep track of up there, this thing is quite a Rube Goldberg contraption that they have put together.
There's some duct tape.
Yeah, there's duct tape, a little baling wire around the outside. Exactly. But they got the biggest piece of this. They got what they wanted, which is, or they're getting what they wanted, which is a huge cut in corporate tax rates. That's what they wanted. That's what they got. And now they believe it's going to drive growth. The question for Republicans is, will people actually care and will they actually credit them for it? Because we have now been in sustained economic growth since really the middle of 2016. Real economic growth in terms of what people are putting in their pockets. Things have been getting better and better and better and better. It's been a very good year before Trump took over. Since Trump took over, the markets are sky high. He mentions it 10 times a day.
Right.
And yet, he's the most unpopular president in modern history.
But when we get to the midterms next year, if this really does work as the GOP is predicting and promoting that it will, on top of what we're already seeing for economic improvement, when people go to the ballot box next fall, will they feel like, I've got more money in the bank. I've got more food on the table. I can buy more Christmas presents this year. Things are feeling pretty good.
Competent and normal will be good. If the Republicans look competent and governance is normal, it will be good. If the Republicans can expect to lose some seats in the House next year because it's the first term midterm.
Always happens.
Every cycle except for 2002 after 9/11, the in-party loses seats in the president's first midterm. That's just how it rolls. So let's say the Republicans are in line to lose 10, 15 seats. No big. It will crunch their cushion, but they can handle it. What they have to be worried about is, does it seem chaotic? Does it seem crazy? Does it seem like we are in a real dipsy doodle and things are not working the way they're supposed to and there's constitutional crises and things are abnormal? If that's going on, then voters will come and put a check on them in a more pronounced way.
A lot can happen in 10, 11 months.
So many dipsy doodles to doodle.
Stand by. All right, Chris Stirewalt, thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, the next high-wire act facing our elected lawmakers is going to be avoiding that government shutdown by 11:59 Friday night. We'll be here and we'll be watching. The House is going to take up an interim government funding bill tomorrow. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is confident the parks are going to stay open. There are going to be no breaks in those Social Security checks getting out to recipients.
Not going to happen. Neither side wants to do that, and when either side wants to have a government shutdown, it doesn't happen.
Well, a couple of obstacles in the way. Republican Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee are both warning tonight that their support for any short-term spending bill to keep the government open will not come without strings attached. They are against permanent reauthorization of that controversial government surveillance program known as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, at least part of it. They want that opened up for debate before they will agree to this interim funding bill. There are other ones out there, too. We'll talk more about those coming up. Well, late tonight, the FBI's second in command facing hours of questions from the House Intelligence Committee. Deputy Director Andrew McCabe testifying behind closed doors on Capitol Hill amid claims from Republicans of bias in the Russia and Hillary Clinton email investigations. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry is following this tonight from Capitol Hill. It's been a long day for McCabe. And
that's right, Shannon. 7.5 hours behind closed doors, to be precise. And that is a lot longer than anyone in either party expected. Also noteworthy that when McCabe was done testifying, he went out sort of a back staircase to avoid reporters, make sure that we weren't pressing him for information about what went behind closed doors. We're still pressing for details. But the bottom line is this long testimony behind closed doors shows that the heat is really being turned up in terms of the investigation of the investigators, particularly Republicans wanting to know more on the House Intelligence Committee about those anti-Trump text messages going back and forth between FBI officials, particularly that one text that talked about a quote-unquote insurance policy in case Donald Trump was elected president. Did that mean that FBI officials were conspiring to investigate him? Andrew McCabe is critical to answering these questions. He's at the center of the storm, as you mentioned, the number 2 official at the FBI. He started facing scrutiny, you'll remember, last year when it was revealed his wife, while running for office in the state of Virginia, had received nearly $500,000 in campaign money from a PAC controlled by Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, and of course a very close ally of Bill and Hillary Clinton. That came just when we heard about that just a few months after McCabe, as deputy to James Comey, then the FBI director, was overseeing the FBI investigation, of course, into Hillary Clinton's private email server. The committee also pressing for answers about what role, if any, McCabe had in terms of that dossier, the anti-Trump dossier that was paid for by the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign. Republicans believe that led to the surveillance of at least one Trump official. And on the Russia probe, those text messages back and forth that I mentioned, look at some of them back and forth. Peter Strzok, that FBI official, one saying, quote, "I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office," that believed to be Andrew McCabe's office, "that there's no way he gets elected meeting Trump, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. Again, the question tonight, whether that was suggesting some sort of conspiracy among FBI officials. Republicans tonight are threatening that if McCabe, between this private testimony tonight and other questions that Republicans have, if they're not answered, they're talking about contempt of Congress charges against McCabe, other FBI and Justice Department officials. Here's Trey Gowdy.
There are a ton of questions, including the one you made reference to, the meeting between Agent Strzok and Lisa Page in, quote, Andy's office. We need to make sure that was Andy McCabe. And if they were coming up with a, quote, insurance policy in case Donald Trump won, that is devastating.
Meanwhile, tonight, Fox has obtained a letter that Republican Senator Ron Johnson has sent to the General Services Administration to get more answers about the tens of thousands of emails that government agency turned over to special counsel Robert Mueller. Johnson writing in part, quote, these allegations raise concerns that GSA personnel disregarded federal statutes governing presidential transitions, thereby potentially undermining the framework for future presidential transitions. More to the point, you'll remember that a Trump transition lawyer over the weekend charged that Robert Mueller's office broke the law by getting those emails. Mueller's office has pushed back, said they obtained those emails properly. But the bottom line, this is far from the last we've heard about all of this because it's raising questions about Mueller's independence. Shannon?
New questions every day. We will await the answers. Ed Henry, live for us tonight. Thanks so much. All right, we are following events on Capitol Hill minute by minute. We're waiting on votes on the tax bill. They are expected to begin around 11:30, maybe 11:45, now sliding back a little bit. So stick around. We're going to take you there live to the Hill as these things happen. Plus, the battle among Democrats to lead President Trump's impeachment. Are they getting ahead of themselves? We're going to debate that. And from NFL cheerleader to running an NFL franchise. That story when we return. House Democrats are set to vote by secret ballot tomorrow on who will replace John Conyers on the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman Conyers resigned from Congress amid allegations of sexual harassment. The two leading contenders to take his spot on Judiciary are Democrats Zoe Lofgren of California and Jerry Nadler of New York. But as one report puts it, it's turning into a battle over who would lead the president's possible impeachment. Radio host Chris Plant, Richard Fowler, a Fox News contributor, join us now to talk about it. I bet you're both just sort of chomping at the bit. It's good to see you both.
Good to see you here. Shannon.
Okay, first of all, I want to start with something that a guest, Richard Painter, had to say on MSNBC. This is how he's painting where the president is tonight. He says, I think we are in danger. Our democracy's in danger. He went on to say, it's the fact that the man who is commander-in-chief of our military engaged in obstruction of justice and other crimes is also psychologically deranged. Chris, is it time for the I word?
You know, I've got to tell you, it's so around the bend. It's so over the top. It's MSNBC. This man is a Republican, purportedly. He's obviously a never-Trumper. And the rhetoric, he was over on MSNBC. And the rhetoric there every day calls President Trump mentally unstable. They make up outrageous fantasies, and then they spread them around. Is it time to bring up the I word? Listen, they've been talking about impeachment since before he was elected, since before he was sworn into office, took the oath of office. And there are certain news organizations, you can't really call them that are banging this drum day in and day out. It's absurd. It's laughable. It is. They have nothing affirmative to contribute. So they yell impeachment. They get people all stirred up and riled up. This is their strategy, apparently, for trying to win back the House next year.
Well, and not all Republicans and not all Democrats, I mean, think that this is a good idea, actually. I think that the latest polling shows somewhere like 41% of people think the idea of impeachment is not a good idea. 54% think it is, or excuse me, the opposite there. 41% say, yeah, go ahead with it, but 54% say this is not a good idea. Democrats, many of them, Senator Joe Manchin is one who spoke out and said this is not a good idea. This is not something we should be wasting time. The Democrats shouldn't be talking about it, but they are. And Richard, in part, that's because we have these two jockeying for the ranking Democrat position on Judiciary. It's a very important position. Zoe Lofgren says this, should it come to that, I would hope that I would have the experience to cope with that in a very orderly and fair and informed manner. Now, Congressman Jerry Nadler, the one who also wants to take this post, says this, as our constitutional expert and with his demonstrated leadership on impeachment in the 90s, Nadler is our strongest member to lead a potential impeachment. That was supposedly on a leaflet that he had out, kind of touting him as the one who should lead the way. What do you make of it, Richard?
I mean, I think this is what you call inner caucus politics, right? I mean, every caucus, both the House caucus, both the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus, they both are drawn to their polls, both the right pole and the left pole, respectively, and this is what they do. But with that being said, I'm not a Democrat that speaks of impeachment. I think we have to let the Mueller investigation investigation run its course and see what it comes out with. And we'll see if the Mueller investigation leads to an impeachment. I don't think it will. I don't know if it will or it won't. I think we have to see what happens here. But with that being said, I think, like I said, this is internal Democratic politics, and we'll see what happens. And we'll have to let the Mueller investigation take its course.
But, Chris, it does sound like they're using this sort of in their campaign speeches, as it were, in trying to lobby their fellow members. Like, you want somebody who's ready for impeachment. That's
I mean, look, it's does anybody remember the phrase Sturm und Drang? This is Sturm und Drang. It's just noise for the sake of noise. They're almost like children. It's sad that politics has sunk this low in Washington, but this is where we are. And again, the Democrats, they were invited to participate in tax reform. They chose not to. Wait.
Program
is obstruction.
Wait, Chris.
And this is their plan for election day next year.
Oh, okay.
Hold on.
All right, Richard.
First of all, this topic is about impeachment, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, that is actually not true. Joe Manchin, which Shannon just talked about, actually he cited on an interview at another network the 6 times he reached to the White House to work on tax reform, and the White House rebuffed him. So just let's be clear about that.
There are Republican members of Congress. Well, first of all, President Trump invited the Democrat leadership to the White House on more than one occasion.
Well, how do you respond to the fact that Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, a Democrat,
Joe Manchin
and he was rebuffed by the White House?
Well, there are Republican members of House and Senate who have both been on today saying that they have attempted to bring the Democrats into the fold.
So how do you explain the fact that Joe Manchin was rebuffed by the White House 5 times?
That is one senator who's saying it's one senator saying it didn't work out, but there were Democrats and when we
and he's
know
not in
that,
leadership either, by the way.
We do know that there were conversations and there were members from both sides of the aisle who were trying to work together, whether the White House was directly involved in that or not. They were trying to get something done. It doesn't look like most of this is going to end up being anything but a partisan vote, but we'll see, because we've seen that in the past for very major things that affect our economy. All right, Chris and Richard, great to see both of you tonight.
Shannon, thanks.
All right, tonight,
to see you.
A follow-up on Monday's report about a major publication alleging the Obama administration sabotaged its own efforts to stop the Hezbollah terror group from turning profits on illegal drugs. So we're going to hear from the investigative reporter behind that story. From the sidelines to the front office amid scandal, Trace Gallagher joins us now with the latest twist in the sex harassment scandal sweeping the nation. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. In the wake of the Carolina Panthers owner Jerry Richardson facing credible allegations of sexual harassment, the team will now be sold at season's end, and Tina Becker will take over as chief operating officer, which puts her not only in charge of the team's day-to-day operations, but also among the NFL's highest-ranking executives. And by all accounts, her appointment has zero to do with political correctness and everything to do with the fact that she's widely respected for knowing almost every facet of the Panthers organization. She started out coordinating the team's cheerleading squad, moved up to director of entertainment, then to executive director, meaning she worked directly with NFL owners and the league itself. Tina Becker says despite the career boost, these have been some of the most difficult days of her 19 years with the team. Quoting, "Our team on the field is performing at a very high level and I believe is bound for the Super Bowl. My immediate focus will be to ensure the corporate side of the organization performs at the same high level while addressing the real concerns that have been raised in recent days." And despite his intention to sell the team, we are told the allegations against Jerry Richardson will be fully investigated. Shannon.
All right. Okay, Teresa, also, we're hearing that Ian McKellen, the actor, is getting some heat for some controversial comments amid all of this conversation.
Yeah, indeed. Surian has stirred things up a bit, but in fairness, we should note that he's pretty adamant when he says that he hopes the improper behavior will be eradicated and that people need to be called out, even though it's difficult for victims to do. Then he said that women were partly to blame for the sex scandal, and he talked about pictures that young actresses used to give a director friend of his. Watch.
And some of them had, I think these were the initials, at the bottom of their photograph, D-R-R. D-R-R. Director's rights respected. In other words, if you give me a job, you can have sex with me.
McKellen, who is openly gay, also called out Kevin Spacey for coming out as gay in response to allegations against him, saying it's reprehensible because it links alleged underage sex with a declaration of sexuality. Shannon.
All right, Trace Gallagher with the latest from Los Angeles. Thank you. All right, we're taking names. That is the message sent by U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. Will the tough talk sway the global body before a big vote? Who better to ask than Ambassador John Bolton? He joins us live. And where in the world are doctors battling police? We'll tell you where and why next. The United Nations General Assembly will hold a rare emergency session this week at the request of Arab and Muslim states to discuss President Trump's statements with regard to Jerusalem. Just yesterday, the U.S. vetoed a UN Security Council resolution condemning President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Here today in the Security Council is an insult. It won't be forgotten. It's one more example of the United Nations doing more harm than good in addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Ambassador Nikki Haley taking it one step further tonight, tweeting this: at the UN, we're always asked to do more and give more. So when we make a decision at the will of the American people about where to locate our embassy, we don't expect those we've helped to target us. On Thursday, there'll be a vote criticizing our choice. The U.S. will be taking names. Fox News contributor and former ambassador to the UN himself, John Bolton, joins us now. Ambassador, great to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Why do they hate Israel so much, apparently, at the UN?
Well, the anti-Semitism is rampant at the UN, has been for a long time. Even in the Bush 41 administration, after we repealed the General Assembly resolution from 1975 that equated Zionism with racism, basically trying to delegitimize the state of Israel, the anti-Semitism continued. And that's what you see here. This is the end of the General Assembly. Everybody wants to get home for vacation. They're now in a flurry of activity. The good news is it's all a big charade. This is theater. Theater of the absurd, many would say. I think the vote on Thursday is likely to be, roughly 180 to 2 against us, and it won't make the slightest bit of difference.
That close. Okay, so here's what the Palestinian ambassador has said about this whole thing.
With this veto, the United States has missed an opportunity to correct its illegal decision with regard to Jerusalem, and it has persisted in its historic sin.
Illegal and historic sin. So with what they're going to pass on Thursday, condemning what the president's done with regard to Jerusalem, then what? It's not like it's going to make him take it back or change his mind.
No, not at all. And, this notion that we put our embassy in what is patently the capital city of Israel, on territory that even the Palestinians have never said should be part of a Palestinian state, that somehow that's illegal is only if you're an international law expert can you believe things like that. But I think what they're missing in New York, certainly in the reaction to the Security Council veto and after this vote in a couple of days in the General Assembly, there will be a counter-reaction in the United States. I think the Trump administration now could quite easily say, let's take this UN budget out and look at it again. We pay 22%. Most Americans don't realize this. 22% of most UN agency budgets, 25% or more in terms of UN peacekeeping. These are called assessed contributions. We don't make that up. We get a budget from the UN agency, and we get to write the check for 22%. I'm not sure I'd count on those checks coming after this charade on Thursday.
Yeah, I don't know that I would test this president on that issue. Okay, I want to quickly get your reaction to something about some missiles coming into Saudi Arabia from Yemen from a rebel group there, it's believed. Here's what Ambassador Haley said about that today.
There were reports this morning that the Houthi militants in Yemen have fired yet another missile into Saudi Arabia. According to the Houthis themselves, it was targeted at a meeting of Saudi leaders in Riyadh, in an area crowded with government offices. While we don't yet have sufficient insight into this particular attack, it bears all the hallmarks of previous attacks using Iranian-provided weapons.
So more Iran in the midst of the chaos.
The Houthi are surrogates for Iran, and people should really look at a map. Yemen is kind of the back door to Saudi Arabia, the other oil-producing monarchies. This is another effort by Iran to destabilize the Middle East as they approach a nuclear weapons capability, which their friends in North Korea are rapidly approaching as well. With the defeat of the ISIS caliphate in Syria and Iraq, Iran now has a direct arc straight through Iraq, Syria, and Hezbollah and Lebanon to the Mediterranean. So there's no wonder that the Saudis and others are very worried about Iran being in their rear in Yemen as well. The Middle East and North Africa have been descending into chaos for much of the last 8 years under Obama. This is another piece of evidence of it, and it's why I think the president's national security strategy, which he brought out yesterday, shows it's a very different view of how American interests in this region play out. And I think that's what Nikki Haley's speech reflects, too.
And all of this against the backdrop of another deadline for the president to decide about certification on the Iran nuclear deal in January as well.
He should tank the deal entirely. This is I think the best thing to do is create a new reality and move on from there.
All right, Ambassador, always great to see you.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for coming in. All right, where in the world in 90 seconds? Medical students and doctors firing slingshots at police in Bolivia. Officers responding with tear gas. The med students and doctors protesting a new law stiffening penalties for medical malpractice. Prison sentences up to 6 years. More than 500,000 doctor appointments have been canceled because of this ongoing strike. Activists launching a campaign in support of a Syrian baby who lost his eye and had his skull crushed in 2 separate government attacks on his besieged hometown near Damascus. The Solidarity with Karim campaign is aimed at bringing attention to the government siege of eastern Ghouta. And British police sending a bomb squad to a house in northern England tonight. Officers carrying out raids and arresting 4 men on suspicion of plotting terrorism. The official extremist threat level for Britain is severe, indicating an attack is considered highly likely. And Romans are calling it spalaccio. You can tweet me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. It's Italian for mangy or threadbare. Rome's official Christmas tree is apparently shedding its needles. It's looking pretty rough. That's earning the ire of critical Romans. City Hall is announcing tonight an investigation into how its official Christmas tree, which apparently this came at a cost of $60,000, arrived in such bad shape. We'll try to keep you updated on that. Meanwhile, much more coming up as we keep an eye on Capitol Hill and what's going on there tonight, the vote coming up. And it all happened in secret. Politico reporting that the Obama administration's Justice and State Departments deliberately undercut efforts to bring down $1 billion drug cartel linked to Hezbollah. Why? And how members of the former administration are pushing back. The Politico reporter who broke the story joins us live. Tonight, a follow-up on Monday's report about a major publication alleging the Obama administration may have sabotaged its own government investigators' efforts to stop the Hezbollah terror group from turning profits on illegal drugs. Politico alleges it was all about the Iran nuclear deal. Joining us now, Josh Meyer, Politico's senior investigative reporter, the man behind this very elaborate story, digging into the former administration's alleged interference with the terror group and a DEA investigation. Great to see you tonight, Josh.
Great to see you.
Okay, so let's walk this through. For people who aren't familiar with this story, how in the world does this connect all of these different prongs of investigations that were happening here through U.S. agencies to a connection with the Iran nuclear deal?
It is a bit convoluted, but here the short version is that Hezbollah is a proxy of the Iran government, especially the IJO, which is, the military wing of Hezbollah is a proxy to them. And so these federal investigators were watching and gathering evidence of Hezbollah sort of transforming itself from a political power and a terrorist organization to one that was trafficking in drugs and other criminal conspiracies to make hundreds of millions of dollars. And the theory was that they documented was that they were doing it to raise money to help rebuild after the Israel war and to help an expansion that they were doing globally. So they gathered evidence. They designated about a couple of dozen super facilitators as people that were connected to the conspiracy, but when they really tried to delve deeply into these people, they got shut down.
And from what I understand in your reporting, there were problems at the State Department, the Justice Department, the DEA had been very involved in these investigations, and when people wanted to push forward, the administration was not especially helpful.
Right, and so, I wouldn't characterize it as one grand conspiracy. I think there's people on Twitter that would like to reduce this to that. What it was a series of actions, some that were taken specifically, intentionally, some that were sort of more part of a broader geopolitical sort of stew that they were doing, and other actions were just things that weren't supported and things that weren't approved. So over the 8 years of the Obama administration, you had potentially dozens of criminal cases that languished. People were transferred. Efforts to create a RICO prosecution were not supported, extraditions and so forth. So at the end of the day, when you really look at it, there's at least 7 or 8 of these major players that they allege were part of this conspiracy, leading the conspiracy, that are out there operating with impunity around the world.
So is the idea that they were not pursued, at least to the fullest extent of possibly they could have been under the law, because the administration was worried it would potentially blow up delicate negotiations over the nuclear deal with Iran?
Well, it's not, I wouldn't say they weren't pursued because of that. I would say that this is a fallout. I mean, what the story does, and I interviewed many dozens of people, reviewed thousands of records, shows that their policy of rapprochement with Iran and their effort to get the nuclear deal created a political climate where the result was a derailment of this policy. So some efforts were intentional, I think some were not, and I'd love to see a sort of full accounting of what happened.
We know there are already a couple of members, GOP members on the Hill, who are asking for that. Now I want to give you a couple of critics from the Obama administration, give you a chance to respond. First of all is Marie Harf, who used to be, of course, with the State Department.
Until Politico wrote this piece, I had never even heard of this program. You know, the Politico story, this narrative in it, is just false. And there's no evidence in this story to back up their allegations. They quote a couple of low-level ideological sources who clearly don't like the Iran deal.
Okay, no evidence, a couple of low-level sources. Then we hear from Tommy Beater, used to be the NSC spokesperson for President Obama. He says in a tweet, there are many reasonable critiques of Obama's foreign policy. The idea that he was soft on Hezbollah is not one of them. The story is so manufactured out of thin air that it's hard to push back except to say that it's a figment of the imagination of 2 very flawed sources.
Right. So a lot of these people have similar themes to their sort of critiques, and so I couldn't resist tweeting back to him and saying, well, why don't you push back? Let's see some specifics here. And I'm a fan of Marie's. I talked to her when she was at the State Department, but she was at a different level at the State Department. She was a spokesperson, and to say that the people that I quoted were low-level people is sort of ridiculous. These were the people that led this task force. They were not ideologues. They're not flawed. I don't know what she's talking about. These were the people. One was a Pentagon person. One was a DEA person. But I also talked to many, many dozens of other people to get sort of ground truth and see if what their allegations were held up to the light of day. And so, this is not a story in 14,000 words where I was just taking some spin from some people. I mean, they spent months of meticulous reporting to document what was happening, talking to people outside of the administration. And so I challenge people to, let me know what the specifics are that they think aren't true.
It is an in-depth piece. I suggest people read it for themselves. Yeah. And we'll see if Congress does get involved. Josh Meyer, thank you for digging into it with us.
Sure.
Good to see you.
My pleasure.
All right, voting starting very soon. We're going to take you back to the Senate in a moment when that happens. This is on the tax bill you've been waiting for. We'll take you there live.
Corporate CEOs increasing the wealth of the very wealthy, sending billions of dollars overseas to overseas investors. That's what's happening already. Corporation after corporation has said, aha, with this new money, we'll do even more stock buybacks. Ultimately,
all right, you are listening in live on the Senate floor. That is Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. We expect them to vote at any time on the Senate's GOP tax reform bill. It'll be a series of votes. Senior producer Chad Pergram is standing by, tracking the process and the progress as only he can do. All of this now as the threat of a government shutdown is waiting in the wings. So, Chad, I want to ask you about that because it looks like this Senate bill will get across the finish line. We think the Senate and then back to the House. But by Friday, they have to come up with a funding package. And I know that there are some real differences between the House and Senate, military spending and other things. Did they get it done by midnight Friday?
It's going to be very hard. What they have to do in the House of Representatives, and this is the controversy between the House and the Senate, the House is going to approve a bill tomorrow which will fund all sections of the federal government for just a couple of weeks until January 19th. They will fund the Pentagon until the end of the fiscal year. Now, that's not going to float in the Senate because they're saying, wait a minute, why are you just handling the Pentagon and not everything else? In addition, they would bolster Pentagon spending. You might remember that we have these sequestration caps, these budgetary caps that kind of harness military spending. They would blow those out of the water. Well, the Senate isn't going to vote for that. So the Senate will probably take their bill. We've been hearing about changing some health care provisions in the bill, cost-sharing reductions. You might remember that the president canceled those in October. This is something that Susan Collins has pushed for, Patty Murray, the Democratic senator from Washington State, has pushed for, and then send that back to the House of Representatives. Now, I talked to Mark Meadows, the chair of the House Freedom Caucus, earlier today, and he says he doesn't think that there would be a majority of the majority in the House to pass that. That's a problem. There's a provision called the Hyde Amendment, named after the late congressman from Illinois, Henry Hyde, which would ban federal money going toward abortions. Even if that provision is in there, Mark Meadows suggested that that would be a problem for House Republicans. So you could see where they get into what they call ping pong here in the House and the Senate, where the House starts with a bill, they ping it over to the Senate changes it, they pong it back. The problem is they don't have a lot of runway. And if you're going to avoid a government shutdown by 11:59 Friday night, especially at Christmas time, we might as well just tie some fake antlers to your dog and take them down the mountain toward Whoville here. People are going to shut down the government like the Grinch at Christmas or something.
Oh, boy. All right. Chad Pergram, we always appreciate your insight. Maybe you'll be here with us late Friday night as we watch this thing go down to the wire.
Very possible.
We appreciate it. We will see you then if necessary. In the meantime, what you're watching now live from home is, again, the Senate floor as they get ready to vote on the tax bill that will go to the Senate. Has to go back to the House for a little cleanup before that tax bill gets done. It would be the first major legislative achievement for the Trump administration. It's something they fought hard for. You saw the Speaker today of the House, Paul Ryan, eliciting a lot of excitement when it got through the House. It is something the administration needs and was promised to the American people. We'll see if they get that done, and then we'll watch on the government funding. In the meantime, most watched, most trusted, and most grateful that you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.